Joining us today is Dr. Beverly Hann. She graduated in 2008 with her doctorate in clinical psychology and practices in Sault Ste. Marie. Her practice focuses on treating adults with counseling, clinical, and rehab psychology. Welcome, Dr. Hann. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in trauma work.
Well, I was a nurse initially, and then I decided to go back to school and become a psychologist. And the thing that really made me interested is when I was doing my postdoc with Kaplan and Kaplan, they were dealing with a lot of motor vehicle accidents and workplace accidents and different kinds of trauma. So that helped me to become more interested in that field. And what really made me interested in the EMDR in particular is when I opened up the office in Halifax with the Veterans Affairs and had to deal with the war trauma of the veterans. And so I ended up going to Gagetown and the military base and learning the EMDR there, which was really helpful. And that was back in 2013. And since then I've been using it pretty much ever since on all different types of issues and found it to be very, very helpful, very quick, very effective, and a wonderful way of treating clients.
Thank you for sharing. And you mentioned a term that maybe not everyone's familiar with, EMDR. Can you tell us what that means?
It's a short form for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's a type of therapy that's used for people that are wanting to deal with different kinds of trauma in their life. And it's used using bilateral brain stimulation with headphones where you have alternating beeps, or people are holding buzzies and they have alternating buzzies in their hands, or it could be visual with the hand going back and forth or lights going back and forth. And what it does is it helps people to process whatever trauma isn't processed properly, where they're still emotional and where they still have some dysfunctional beliefs that are interfering with their lives. And so it's a really wonderful, fast way of doing therapy and helping people to get back on their path again.
That sounds really wonderful. And I appreciate you sharing a little bit more. And can you define for us what trauma actually means?
Well, for me, it's just an overwhelming amount of stress that happens with people that exceeds their ability to cope and integrate the emotions involved in whatever issue they're having. And what happens is that the information doesn't get processed properly when people are going through an intense emotional experience, and often then can have different symptoms that are very stressful for them. And in the day-to-day life, people often can deal with traumas, but after so many, some people reach their breaking point and find they're not coping so well after a while. And so that's where doing the trauma work is helpful, because then people can move on and not stay stuck in things that have bothered them from the past.
That's really helpful to have a definition, because I think sometimes people might not recognize perhaps if they're experiencing trauma, or, commonly we might think about trauma as only something that is really catastrophic that's occurred. But it sounds like from your definition, that's not always the case.
Right. Sometimes even small things can cause people trauma depending on what their past has been. Like, for example, if somebody's been bullied in their younger years, and then they have a boss that is on their case now in their older years, they might be more sensitive to that because they haven't dealt with their bullying in their younger years. And so they may not respond so well to a new situation that has that same kind of thing. And so they can be easily triggered by different things if they haven't dealt with that and it hasn't been processed properly.
Mm-hmm. And who would be the typical clients or patients that you might see to do trauma work, or more specifically EMDR?
Well, I see a variety of clients, all adults, because I only deal with adults, 18 and up. But generally the people that I see do have some kind of trauma. It could be a motor vehicle accident, workplace accident, disability. Could be people with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, or even addictions. I do assessments with Homewood Health for addictions. And so Sometimes it's relationship issues. Sometimes it's just things from the past that people want to get over. Could be grief or loss from losing a partner or a parent, a dog, any kind of loss. And I deal with all kinds of people from different backgrounds. Some of them do have insurance through their workplace. I'm certified with First Nations, Veterans Affairs, Blue Cross, many of the EAP providers. And so I see people from all different walks of life, anywhere from 18 to 80. So it's quite a broad spectrum, mostly about in the middle, though, between 30 and 50 is pretty average.
That's pretty amazing that there's such diversity in the patients that you help and support. And with our focus being on women's health, and you had mentioned relationships, so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about how, as women, the work that you do could support us to have healthier relationships.
Well, many times people find that they're not very assertive in relationships, and they hold a lot of their emotional feelings inside, and so they might be frustrated with the partner and not speak up. And oftentimes women do the lion's share of the work, it seems, still with housework and childcare, and many times they're working as well. And so if they're not feeling comfortable speaking up, then they can hold those negative feelings against their partner, and it can cause problems in their relationship. So I do also cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps people with assertiveness techniques and helps them to learn how to talk to their partner in a way that they can be heard, in a way they can get what they want and not hurt the other person or upset them. And so sometimes just some good communication techniques are really helpful to help people to get back on track in their relationship and to deal with whatever things might be festering or bothering them. And so it offers a safe place to discuss the issue. Sometimes we do role playing to help them so that when they go home, when they actually try the technique on, they can actually find it to be really helpful. So it's really important that people do have good communication styles, and many times I'm finding that's a really big roadblock to successful relationships, as people are just not being open and honest with each other.
Absolutely. I think you hit on a really key point, and I would argue that, communication is a really essential skill as a human being, and that it's something, as you mentioned, is something you can learn, you can improve upon, you can use experience with practice in order to really strengthen that skill set, which is really great. And it's wonderful that your work actually provides an opportunity for women to do that.
For sure. Excellent.
So what are some common obstacles that women who are perhaps struggling with trauma might encounter?
Well, some of the things that I see is that if they do have trauma, then often they're triggered easily by different events that might be going on around them. Whatever they're things that they haven't resolved, then they end up being sensitive to them. And so those things are really hard because it can give them anxiety attacks, and then they need to have a hard time dealing with that, and they might think they're having a heart attack when it's just anxiety and going to the hospital. A lot of times the trauma causes people to have negative beliefs about themselves, and that can be a whole lot of different things, like not feeling that they deserve love, or not feeling that they're important, or that they're a failure or a disappointment, and that it's not okay to show their emotions, and they can't stand up for themselves. So that often gets in the way of people actually having the best life that they could. Financial constraints often are an issue because therapy does cost money. Sometimes it's covered for people that go to the different places at the hospital or to the walk-in counseling center, but to see a psychologist, you do have to pay for that. So it does involve a financial investment and some time constraints as well. So if women are already very busy with their children and their husband and their work, and they do have to set aside that time for themselves each week to come for therapy. And sometimes even just getting time off for that. I do try and be flexible and see clients in the evening as much as I can, but sometimes it's hard because a lot of people want that time. And so some people do need to come during the day to see me. And also childcare issues also have got in the way because they didn't have a sitter for their young children, and fear of the unknown because people definitely aren't used to maybe thinking about seeing a psychologist and they're not really sure what to expect. And so I do talk with people before they come just so they know what to expect the first time when they come. And then often when they come here, they feel much more relaxed because they realize it's not the big deal that they thought it was.
That's helpful to hear. I think many women will be able to relate to those obstacles. And I think it is important to think about, particularly what you mentioned with the negative beliefs, or, any of these beliefs could be limiting. Perhaps if we prioritize our time differently or shift things around, we could overcome these obstacles. Can you share a little bit more about the impact of negative beliefs on us?
Well, the negative beliefs actually are very much running our behavior as well as our negative emotions. And people don't realize how much they do impact our lives. And it's only in talking about the impact of different situations that people might have had do they realize, oh, you know what, I really don't feel really good about myself. And that's because maybe my parents were strict and nothing I ever did was good enough, or maybe they didn't do well in school and they've carried that failure with them, or they've had some kind of traumatic experience, whether it be abuse or trauma from any kind of situation. And so people internalize that negative view of themselves. And then when I see them in therapy and we talk about the situation and ask them about how it's impacted their view of themselves, they're quite surprised as to how much that has run their life. Because if people aren't feeling good about themselves, they're not going to put themselves out there. They're not going to take risks. They're not going to do things that they might normally want to do. They'll kind of play it safe and not really become all they can be. And so it's really quite limiting having those beliefs because it keeps people in fear and keeps them from exploring things and doing things with their lives that maybe they'd really like to, maybe doing a career they like, and they stay in a safe career that's not making much money because they don't want to put themselves out there because they might get rejected. So it really governs a lot of their lives. So it's really an important thing to deal with, these negative beliefs, so that people can move on and have the life that they want and be happy in their lives.
Absolutely. It's interesting because, with negative beliefs, it sounds like what you're saying is it could be quite constraining and almost put us in a box and not allow us to really access our full potential.
For sure. Absolutely. I can definitely say that. And once these beliefs are cleared through the trauma therapy, people are amazed how much their life changes and how much they can feel comfortable then going out into the world and doing the things that they want. And it's just like a whole big veil has been lifted off them, and they can have that freedom then to do the things they want with their life. And it's pretty exciting to see once the beliefs are healed.
Absolutely. So if we're, in our audience, there might be some women who are experiencing the effects of trauma. What could they do right now to start to improve their well-being?
Well, some of the really helpful things that I talk to people about is to get help from others around them that care about them, whether it's their spouse or their parents or their friends, and to get a support group and talk to them about the problems, whoever they feel safe talking with, and to get professional help, because it's really in getting the professional help that they can actually get rid of the issue rather than just coping with it. And so that's where seeing a psychologist comes in, especially if it's the trauma work. Doing the EMDR work is really, really helpful. And taking really good care of themselves. Often women take care of everyone else, the children, the husband, the workplace, and they don't have time to really make sure that they get their 3 meals a day and their snacks, and they don't get adequate rest, and they may not take time out for themselves or their relationships. And so just really women putting themselves back into the equation and actually carving out that time for themselves before they do other things, because the better they are for themselves, the better they can be for others. And then knowing when they're in trouble and calling the appropriate people. So calling crisis if they're feeling suicidal or if they need to have some immediate help, or 911 if it's really urgent. And just even sometimes doing some deep breathing just to calm themselves if they are feeling really anxious, taking a few moments and just taking a few nice deep breaths often will help to center people so that they don't get so revved up. So it's important to practice some calming techniques, some breathing, some relaxation, some meditation, some things that will just put them in a nice space. So whatever they have to deal with, it's a whole lot easier. Because if they're stressed to the nines, they're just really not going to do a good job of whatever it is they have to do. And so even if they have to go to the bathroom for a few moments to do that, or some quiet place in the house, the bedroom, or wherever they have to, just to take a few moments to debrief and to calm themselves, and then go back out and do whatever it is they have to do, especially if they're triggered and feeling revved up from whatever triggering events have caused them the problems.
Makes sense, because we're not usually at our best when we're feeling a lot of pressure or stress. So I think it's a great point you make to take that time out and carve out an opportunity wherever, whenever you can. If you just need to pause and breathe and like reconnect to the present moment, that's really helpful.
For sure. Very, very important.
I'm wondering too, how might women who are facing trauma adapt their self-care in times of high stress? Because throughout our lives, stress will wax and wane. It will come and go. How might we adapt?
Well, some of the things to look at in times of high stress is to making a priority list and deciding what's really important, because what ends up happening is people have so many things on their list and they just are doing a little of this and a little of that, and there may be things that aren't really critical. And so just deciding ahead of time what's really important and what is a must, and making sure that those things get done, and setting a priority of those different things that have to be done, and putting the other ones off that maybe could wait a day or two if it's not so critical. Putting some leisure time aside, because many times people are just go, go, go and work, 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 and they don't put that fun time aside for themselves, whether it's just taking time for a walk or watching a comedy on TV, or time to have a nice bubble bath or listen to some music or sit out on the porch, or whatever it is that people like to do with their leisure time. Just putting some time in the schedule for some fun, going on a trip, those kinds of things. Doing some kind of relaxation technique, meditation, breathing, bubble baths. I'm a big fan of meditation. I do that every day myself, and I really encourage that for clients, just because it just helps you get to that nice quiet place and to center yourself. And I like the mindfulness meditation in particular. I studied with Dr. John Kabat-Zinn in the Omega Center and did his course, and really found that helpful, and have found that to be helpful in my day-to-day life, and helpful in encouraging others to do that as well, just to keep them in a good place when life is crazy all around them. At least then they can stay nice and calm. And not overcommitting, because many times people commit so much and then they have such a huge list of things. And when they come to therapy, oftentimes we have to try and whittle down that list and say, okay, who can you give this job to? Can you farm this out? Can you delegate this? And so they realize, they don't have to do it all, because many times we think, well, unless we do it, it's the only way it's going to be done right. But many times other people can do things too, and we have to let go of that need to control and do everything ourselves. That people are only happy to help us, but we do have to let them. So asking people for help is a really big thing, and a really hard thing for people. Interesting, they'll help people, but they don't want to ask for help themselves. And even telling your boss, I've had some clients that have had to have a heart-to-heart with their boss saying, look, I just have too huge of a workload here. I cannot manage. And so that's been a really hard conversation for them, because they feel it's because they're not coping or they're inadequate, but meanwhile it's because truly they have too much to do. And so bringing that to the attention of someone that can actually do something about it is very, very important to do. Getting your rest is really important, making sure you get enough sleep, and that's a huge issue for many people. They're very sleep deprived. And talking about good sleep hygiene techniques and having a regular bedtime and trying to be in bed at a certain time each night and doing some things to calm yourself before bed instead of things to rev you up. And whatever that is, whether it's a warm bath or whether it's listening to some nice music or doing a meditation before bed, people do need to get more rest and find some ways to soothe themselves when they are feeling very stressed, whatever that is. And putting some exercise daily in their routine is really helpful, whatever it is for people, whether it's going for a walk or going to the gym, whatever is helpful to do some kinds of exercise, and just know your limits, because many times we think, oh yeah, I can do that and I can do that, and they keep saying, yes, yes, I can do that, and then after a while they're like, oh my goodness, what did I just agree to? I just agreed to so many things and I can't possibly do them all.
You shared so many amazing points there. I really appreciate you, narrowing in on some of the most important foundations for self-care. I know in my practice that these are certainly things that I talk about with my patients every single day, and they do make a very meaningful impact, not just on our physical health, but on our mental, emotional health as well. And I wanted to narrow in on another question in something that you brought up, because this is something that I noticed that women often have really tough time navigating, which is letting go of control. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, that is a hard thing because people feel like they need to do everything. They have to do the childcare, they have to make the meals, they have to cook, they have to clean, they have to go to work. And sometimes it's just too much trying to do it all. And we really do need to look at sharing different tasks and sharing the housework and sharing the things that are needed to be done, and realizing that the partner that you're with may not do them exactly perfectly or exactly the way you want, but it's still okay. They may not fold the laundry exactly like you would, but at least they're helping and they're folding the laundry, and realizing everything doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of people have very high standards for themselves and they try to impose those on others, and the other partner gets very frustrated because they can't meet that high standard of perfection. And so maybe they're not folded exactly the same way, but you know what? They're still folded, and really in the big picture doesn't matter if the corners are folded perfectly or the bed's made perfectly.
So
That
true.
it really needs to, people need to let go of that perfectionism and that need to control everything, because there's many things in life we can't control, and we
Yeah.
need to let go of those things if we cannot control them. The things
Very-
we can try and deal with them, but many things we can't. And so the stress comes because we react to those things, and we have to just realize, you know what, I really can't do anything about that issue. So I do need to let it go and not get myself so revved up about it. And then focus on the things you can control. What I often find helpful is people having a family meeting and deciding, okay, who likes to do what and who's going to do what. And so everybody gets to chip in and be part of the family chores and things. So everybody feels involved and people are doing the things they like as much as possible. And so it's more shared rather than everything falling on the female, because it's just too much trying to do everything. And so sometimes trauma work needs to be done on that issue of wanting to control, because that may come from not having control in your life when you're younger. If maybe you had some kind of situation come up where you weren't in control, such as abuse, then you later in life might have a stronger need to control things because you didn't have that when you were younger. And so doing the trauma work around that will release that desire to feel like you have to control everything. And so that's where it's really helpful doing the work, because and your beliefs aren't getting in the way of your life, and you don't always have to be dealing with that issue then. So it's really, really helpful.
Thank you. And I think those are helpful strategies for women to think about, and how to involve others and delegate and really make it a team effort with their family or other people that are in their inner circle. I have a final question for you. Resilience is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it's also something that's so important for women's wellness. What does becoming more resilient mean to you, and how does that relate to the women that you work with?
Well, being more resilient for me means being able to spring back emotionally after going through difficult or stressful times in one's life. And that could be a job loss, that could be divorce, could be bereavement, could be any number of things that could happen. And so many times people can be resilient and bounce back, but after time, and you have trauma after trauma, sometimes people don't bounce back so quickly after there's a certain level of trauma. And so that's when they start having mental health issues, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, those kinds of things. And so that's when they need to look at, okay, maybe this is time for me to see someone and to deal with some of these issues because I'm not bouncing back so quickly like I did before. And you're staying stuck in the emotional symptoms of sadness or anxiety or stress. And so in therapy, I find that it's really helpful to deal with the issues that are holding people back and to deal with the specific traumas, the ones that are causing the most problems, so that people aren't held back in their life from moving forward, because we want people to continue to be resilient. And so the more resilient that you are, the more you can deal with stress. And so you want to have the ability, so as more stress comes into your life, that you can deal with it and just get on with your life and not let it stop you or slow you down. When people come in, we make a list of all the things that they'd like to clear in their lives and then work on them one by one to clear them off the list, because trauma is stored in a line, and after a while that line gets really heavy if you have a whole lot of traumas. And so we try and pick the important ones off the line, so then it's not weighing the person down and having them to be really stressed about their lives and not coping well. It's the coping that's really important, because people need to be able to cope with whatever comes their way. And if they have too much on their shoulders and on their plates, then they just stop coping well after a while. And so it really is helpful to take that off their shoulders, release that, and then they can feel a whole lot lighter and able to move around in their life a lot better and grow more and become better people and be their personal best without being weighed down by all that extra trauma that they're carrying around with them.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on resilience. And I can see by what you shared how it relates to trauma work as well, because it can really enhance our resilience if we can lift the weight of the heaviness of the trauma that we may have experienced off our shoulders. And I also want to thank you so much, Dr. Hann, for joining us today and sharing all your wisdom and all your insight. I know that women are going to be positively impacted by what you shared.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.